Well, what we do is, obviously, the independent pay review body looks every year.
Independent? Is it independent?
It is independent, yeah. What we will do is we'll go to the independent pay review process. Obviously, there's the independent review bodies. You know, our door is always open, but right now,
But it's not if you're sending them to the pay review body.
Well, that's the process that we're in place. So, you know, it makes sense now that we both, you know, sort of put our evidence in, and then an independent person looks at all of that, and then we'll come up with their recommendations. The independent pay review body, I've already given my evidence to the independent pay review body.
And when the so-called independent pay review body recommended another crappy real terms pay cut for teachers, the Education Secretary couldn't contain her excitement.
And of course we have an independent pay review body, and this year we did fully accept all of their recommendations in full. We have accepted all of the pay recommendations. We'd agreed, you know, the independent pay review body, you know, their recommendations.
And neither could the Prime Minister.
When it comes to the issue of pay, we have accepted in full the independent recommendations of the pay review bodies.
Watch that clip again and note the Education Secretary nodding happily to the Prime Minister's right.
When it comes to the issue of pay, we have accepted in full the independent recommendations of the pay review bodies.
But now it seems when the pay review body recommends a slightly higher crappy real terms pay cut than the government would have liked, it no longer wants to accept the recommendations. Well, absolute bollocks to that. And you may need to sit down for this next bit.
We can't simply, I mean, what they want and what they've asked for, and they, you know, all of the public sector workers, all the workers that are on strike have got one thing in common. They want inflation or inflation-busting pay increases. And that would be the wrong thing to do. It would be irresponsible to do, because it would bake in inflation for longer. It would make everybody poorer for longer.
It's just another Tory government con, and the Education Secretary knows it. What she's saying is that our teachers and other public sector workers who kept this country going during the pandemic, who've already suffered more than a decade of crappy real terms pay cuts, should accept another crappy real terms pay cut so the government can bring down inflation. It's completely untrue, and it's been debunked over and over again by economists. But that hasn't stopped the Education Secretary running around UK news shows shamelessly repeating it.
We've had a discussion about inflation and inflation rise, and we said, look, you know, we cannot bake in inflation. It would affect everybody. These inflation-busting pay rises are unreasonable and they're unrealistic. What we have to do is get rid of inflation. We know why it's there, the war in Ukraine, etc., and the overhang of the pandemic. But we need to focus on that, not bake it in through, you know, giving inflation-busting pay rises. You know, I've said to them very clearly, you know, inflation-busting sort of pay rises are not on the cards, because that would be the wrong thing for everybody. We need to get inflation down.
And today the Prime Minister again got in on the act.
I think people need to recognise the economic context we're in, and I'm going to make the decisions that are the right ones for the country. That's not always easy, people may not like that, but those are the right things for everybody, that we get a grip of inflation, and that means the government not excessively borrowing too much money and being responsible with public sector pay settlements. That's what I'm going to do.
How many more times do I have to point this out? If a private sector company increases its wages, yes, that goes directly into the cost of making that product or service, and that might end up increasing the price. But that's not the case for public sector workers such as education and healthcare, which are free at the point of use. That means consumers don't pay for them directly, so they don't affect the inflation statistics. The Education Secretary knows that, and so does the Prime Minister. And don't just take my word for this, listen to Stephanie Flanders, an expert economist and head of Bloomberg News Economics, speaking to the BBC's Laura Kuenssberg on April 16th.
They're concerned that inflation, which we know is putting so much pressure on people, will be bumped further up if they hand over lots more money to the public sector. As a very expert economist, does that stack up?
It is not something that economists tend to agree with, I'm sorry, because it is very different. If you have a private sector company increase its wages, well, that goes directly into the cost of making that product or service and may well then end up meaning they have to increase the price in the shops. Obviously, that's not the case with public sector workers. There isn't a price that's going to go up.
And remember, the public sector labour force makes up only about 17% of the total workforce, so it has much less of an impact on the economy than the private sector. The government's refusal to pay our teachers, our doctors and our nurses what we all know they are worth is just another one of its crappy political choices. And now it's shamelessly trying to cause division with the public by conning them with a justification which it knows has been rubbished over and over again by most economists. Never underestimate just how thick this government thinks we all are.